So the Zack Snyder cut of the Justice League movie came out recently, and I mean, yeah, it's better. There's a lot to talk about with this movie, and there's a lot of good to talk about with this movie, but there's also a lot of not good stuff to this movie. And before you hate me, before you immediately dislike me, I just want to say for a fact that yes, it's better than the original Justice League movie. Okay? Do not yell at me, but there is a lot to talk about. So for this video, I'm going to split it off into two sections because there is a lot to talk about. I will admit there's a lot of good stuff, but there's also a lot of negativity that I have to share about this 4-hour freaking movie. So if you are a Zack Snyder hater and you just want to hear all the negative things I have to say, then by all means, click the timestamp that's here on my titties. But yeah, like I said, we're kicking this review off with the good stuff. And the first thing that will immediately strike you is that all of the characters are actually being well represented. Go figure, having 4 hours of movie length means that there are 4 hours of character development that you can have. People like The Flash and Cyborg have a lot of time to develop that they didn't really necessarily have in the 2-hour span of the original Justice League movie. So yeah, let's talk about one of the characters that I'm referring to, and that's Cyborg, because he is he's really cool in this movie, guys. He's really cool in this movie. I mean, I would argue that out of 4 hours, probably 45 minutes of this movie is dedicated to Cyborg specifically. And as a Cyborg fan, I'm pretty into that. He finally feels like he has a reason to be so negative. He has a reason to be pissed off at people. He has a reason to, well, be there. Because one of the main things that I'm a bit iffy about, but I'm gonna say I like it, about Cyborg is that they turned him from just a guy who has some cool, edgy hacking powers to basically an eternal demigod that can destroy the world in an instant. Cyborg could probably destroy the world faster than Superman. Like, they turned this dude from a guy who shoots lasers to a guy who can launch nuclear missiles and destroy the planet with a thought. Maybe the more I say it, he's a bit too overpowered. Maybe it's a bad thing, but I'm gonna say it's a good thing. Cyborg having all this power is really cool. However, like I said, Cyborg has a lot of screen time and, well, he kind of feels like he has a lot of stuff going on. This movie is definitely kind of revolving around Cyborg in a way. Like, his dad dies for the sake of a mother box. He goes through this arc and they tell you his whole backstory. There's a lot happening with Cyborg, and it's actually pretty interesting. Hell, Cyborg basically has his own Iron Man scene. Like, this guy is definitely becoming one of the focal points of the movie, just based on the fact that he is featured like he is sort of the center of this massive universe. But like I said, Cyborg, he has a lot of screen time. He has a lot of character development. He has a lot of rich Cyborg story awesomeness in this movie. But he's not the only character that gets a lot of screen time in comparison to their screen time in the original movie. No. Now, let's talk about The Flash. So, Barry Allen. I don't know if this is going to make a lot of sense, but whenever I saw Barry Allen on screen, I felt really happy. Sure, he's the comedic character of the bunch, so it's easy to like the guy, but The Flash kind of gave me that Tom Holland, Peter Parker vibe. And what I mean by that, and maybe this is going to be a bit hard to describe, but every time I personally see Tom Holland as Spider-Man in the MCU, I get really happy, okay? Every time I see Tom Holland as Spider-Man, it definitely just makes me feel good. I don't know if that will translate very well to you guys, but every time I see him, I just feel really happy. And when I saw The Flash, I kind of got a similar feeling after a while. Okay, as soon as I saw Ezra Miller, even in the first movie, I just thought, that dude is the Flash. Like, every time I saw him, something about him just felt interesting. Like, I couldn't necessarily keep my eyes off of him in any particular scene. And maybe that's just because he's the comedic character, so you obviously kind of like the guy a bit more. But overall, the Flash, he just felt like one of those characters that you wanted to like, and the movie made it easy for you to like him. However, speaking of characters that you absolutely just want to fall in love with, let's talk about Alfred for a few seconds. Now, I don't know why, and I can't necessarily put my finger on it, but Jeremy Irons as Alfred in this movie kind of just feels really good. Like, every time I saw him, I kind of got a similar vibe that I had with the Flash, to where every time I saw him, I just kind of felt really good. Like, for some reason, Jeremy Irons kind of fits this role perfectly. Okay, Alfred should kind of be the only guy around Batman that actually wants to be there, and maybe he's probably the only guy who wanted to be in the movie, but he definitely feels like he wants to be there, especially in contrast to some of the other people in this movie who were kind of obviously not 100% into the movie, especially when they were asked to do reshoots and stuff. Maybe it's just because Alfred is awesome, and I like Alfred regardless, but to me, Jeremy Irons as Alfred, I can get down with that. Every time I saw him, I liked it, and that's what you should think about when you see Alfred. Just every time you see him, you're supposed to like him, and that's exactly what happened with me. But now let's talk about the guy that you're not necessarily supposed to love. Let's talk about Darkseid for a second. So, Darkseid being in this movie was interesting, to say the least. I will say that he definitely kind of just feels like the Thanos of the DCEU now. Like, sure, there's always been comparisons between Thanos and Darkseid. I mean, they're two giant, super powerful demigod aliens, and they both have armies and stuff, so the comparisons are definitely there. But I will say, Darkseid being in this movie definitely just felt like Zack Snyder wanting to make his own Thanos. He basically took all the post-credit teases that we saw from Thanos in the MCU, and he just put them in the actual 4-hour-long movie. And I'm not saying that I didn't like it. I'm not saying it. But it definitely felt a bit fan servicey at times. Darkseid, even though he's a really cool being, and I like Darkseid, him being in the movie just never felt warranted, okay? He kind of feels like one of those characters that maybe should have the post-credit scene treatment like Thanos in the Avengers movies. But he definitely just kind of feels a bit shoved in there. And like I said, I like him. I like Thanos. And I like Darkseid. But as you just saw by me misremembering who the hell I was talking about, you can kind of get my point. They feel very similar right now in the MCU and DCEU, Zack Snyder EU, whatever you want to call it. But overall, Darkseid, maybe not needed, but hey, it was cool nonetheless. But now I'll get to some of, well, the Zack Snyder things that you kind of expect in this movie. Now, there are people who don't necessarily love Zack Snyder as a director and stuff, and even though I can understand some of their points, I will say that what Zack Snyder is really good at, he aces in this movie, and that is how epic the entire movie feels and the fight scene choreography. When it comes to fight scenes specifically, Zack Snyder is really freaking good, okay? He's really good at making all of his characters feel incredibly powerful, to the point where when Aquaman and Steppenwolf were having that fight, if I didn't already see the movie before, I would have thought that Aquaman could probably actually beat Steppenwolf, okay? For some reason, Aquaman feels very powerful, just like how all of his characters feel very powerful. And I mean, I already mentioned the power levels with guys like Cyborg and the Flash, but of course, obviously, Superman, Batman, all these guys, we've seen this before in other Zack Snyder movies, but every DC character in particular feels really powerful. And I don't want to say too much because I do have a video about this planned for the future, but for now, just know that every character feels really powerful, and I kind of like it. And of course, as I mentioned a few moments ago, every shot, for the most part, feels super, super epic and grand, okay? It's definitely one of those movies where every frame is a painting, if you've heard that expression before. And I would say that this movie, even though it may look a bit ugly at times, I will say that everything in this movie feels really big. And it's kind of interesting. It's a very different approach because when it comes to like Marvel movies, which we've seen over the past 10 years or so, everything sort of feels grounded in reality, whereas every shot in this movie feels really grand and epic. And like I said, I kind of like it. But now it's time to talk about the bad stuff, because like I said, there's a lot of good stuff. There's some good character development, there's some good epicness to the movie, but yeah, there's also a lot of really not so good stuff in this film. Now, before we get into what I think is really not so good about this movie, let's talk about the main thing that may hold people back from watching it. And that is the 4-hour runtime of this thing. It is long. That is an afternoon of DCEU stuff. And I don't know. It's long. It's really long. And it's long. And I think that it doesn't need to be as long, personally. I think they got the go-ahead to make it 4 hours long, so they did it. But they really could have kept it to 3 hours, and it would basically be the same movie. After about 20 minutes of the movie, I actually sat there and stopped watching it because I was so bored. Like, I knew where everything was going, and I knew what was going to happen because I saw the original, but after 20 minutes, I thought that everything felt so unbelievably long. Like, that's the reason why this review is going up way later than I wanted to, because it just felt so long, and I didn't really feel the need to make this review, but then I finally sat down and watched it, and then I figured, nah, I need to talk about this movie. But overall, it's just really long. Again, I can't stress this enough. Everything about this movie feels a little too long, especially the fight scenes. Now, I know that I was just singing the praises of Zack Snyder a few seconds ago, talking about those fight scenes, but wow, this dude needs to kind of take a step back and think, does this fight need to be like 10 minutes long? And for most of those fight scenes that are 10 minutes long, no, they do not need to be that freaking long. But if you can get through the 4-hour runtime, I will say that there is still a lot of things that aren't necessarily that great, or at least in my opinion, are a little bit bad. For instance, I have 2 things that I want to say when comparing this version of the movie and the original version of the movie. And when I'm comparing those 2 movies, the original Justice League and the Zack Snyder Justice League together, well then, maybe the Zack Snyder Justice League thing has some issues. And the first thing is that the original movie actually feels a bit more depressing in the right way. Okay, Superman just died, and it feels like the entire world is grieving for Superman. Whereas in this movie, you don't really get a whole lot of that, and maybe that's just because they didn't want to make it so dark and sad and depressing, which I understand. But I will say that Superman just died, and it feels like not that many people are sad. They kind of look at Superman as a being, as a protector. Whereas Martha, if you want to talk about her from the Martian Manhunter scene, and Lois are kind of the only 2 characters that feel like they give a shit that Superman died outside of him protecting them. Everybody else in the movie kind of talk about Superman and Clark Kent as a way to win this war, or an asset. Whereas Lois and Martha, in that one scene, and again, Martha is in air quotes, are kind of the only 2 characters that feel as though they care about Superman as a human being. And maybe this is just one of those things that's wrong with Zack Snyder when he portrays Superman as a godlike figure, but Superman never feels like he's really a human, or he's never treated as a human being. No, instead, Superman is kind of just more or less talked about as just this asset for them to win. But I don't know, maybe that's just me. I actually want to know what you guys have to say about that in particular. Do you guys think that Superman should feel more loved and appreciated as a human being, or do you understand the idea of Superman just being seen as a way to win? But that's not the only bad thing I have to say about Superman when it comes to this movie and the original Justice League movie, because this is the second and final thing that I want to say when comparing the 2. I do not understand the idea of Superman being super pissed off when he gets resurrected. For me, that entire scene of the Justice League versus Superman is... it's just stupid as hell. I do not like that scene. Okay, that entire scene is completely dumb. When Superman and the rest of the Justice League start to fight each other after the resurrection, because it's just... there's no real point to it. Like, Superman completely destroys the rest of the Justice League. All of these superhuman beings that are supposed to be, like, gods among men in the DCEU don't do shit to Superman. The scene is basically negated by the end of the movie, and there's no real need for that scene in particular, so why they have it, I have no idea. Also, while I'm complaining, I could totally understand Superman being angry specifically with Batman, okay? Because obviously before Superman died, Batman and Superman were having a bit of a tussle. So if he's angry at anybody, just be angry at Batman. What if just Lois Lane didn't show up? Like, I can't unthink that. What if Lois Lane didn't just show up and stop Superman's massive outrage and destruction? Like, would Superman just become evil? Is that what's gonna happen? Is Superman gonna become evil because of that? I don't know. That's just my personal take. I don't really like that scene. And hell, I probably could make an entire video about that scene alone. I think you get the gist. I don't like that scene. However, now I'm done talking about the original movie and this movie in the same breath because, well, I understand that if I continue talking about both movies in the same breath, I might have a laser pointed at my head by the end of this video. But yeah, so let's talk about this movie in particular, and I only have a few bad things to say when it comes to it being, you know, a movie. For one, it doesn't ever really feel connected to itself. I mean, sure, The Flash and Cyborg and Batman and all of these individual characters have individual arcs and individual things going on, but for the most part, none of the movie feels very connected to one another. Every scene outside of Wonder Woman and Bruce Wayne scenes feel a bit disconnected from the actual plots. Okay, Cyborg and The Flash in particular, they kind of have their own scenes and their own backstories being filled into the universe. Like I said, I like that Cyborg and The Flash get a lot more screen time, but they don't get a whole lot of screen time with everybody else. Especially Cyborg when I'm talking about that. Cyborg definitely kind of feels like his own character in the movie, and then there are all these other guys kind of doing their own thing, but they're all sort of somewhat connected. However, maybe that disconnect wouldn't exist if everybody else had their own movie before the Justice League movie. And I know, that sounds like I'm trying to say that they should have copied the MCU with this one, because that's kind of what they did, where everybody had their own movie like Thor, Captain America, Iron Man, but I will say that maybe with the Justice League movie, and this was a complaint I had back in the original movie as well, maybe everybody should have had their own movies to go along with this one. Cyborg, like I said, has a movie in his arc. There is an entire arc there that could be its own movie. And then, when it comes to this movie, maybe he could have maybe 1 or 2 scenes instead of, like, a good 50 minutes of screen time. But that's enough about the plot in particular. Now, before I get to basically the end of this review, because I bet there's a lot of things that I could say, but I'm gonna just stick to a few bad things in particular. The effects in this movie are weird. They are bold, italicized, underlined, weird. Like, sometimes the movie's effects look really great, and then holy shit, some of them look really bad. Like, they have some really interesting looking CGI with Steppenwolf, Darkseid, and other aliens in this movie, but they all kind of look like video game characters, and I can't tell if it's in a good way or not. I'm not necessarily a special effects artist, but considering the fact that I think they're a bit odd, I'm gonna say that they look really weird. Like, again, I like the fact that Darkseid looks ripped from the comic book pages, but he does look a bit weird, doesn't he? Like, Darkseid is not necessarily a character that you can see standing next to people. Like, legit, when they had the portal between the Justice League and the Darkseid army world in the end of the movie, it looked like they were looking into a video game. It was so weird. But again, this is a director's cut, basically, so I'm not necessarily angry at that. I just figured that it was something to take note of. But yeah, that's basically it. Okay, if you've seen the original Justice League movie, you kind of know what the plot is, so it kind of doesn't feel necessary to talk about the plot, and I kind of talked about all the new stuff when it comes to Cyborg and the Flash earlier on. So yeah, that's basically it for this review. But the question still remains, do I still want to see some more of the Snyderverse? And while I think that the Snyderverse in particular was a bit dumb, I think that there was a lot of dumb stuff, and I will admit that some of that is from the original movie. I can't say that I hated the experience, okay? I hated the fact that it was four hours long, but overall, I was pretty into it. Basically, it's got a lot of good, a lot of bad, and way too much of everything. Which is basically how you can describe everything DC has been doing in the past 5 years or so, I would argue. Okay, there is a lot of good to be had, but there's also a lot of weird, not good stuff. In fact, the entire DCEU, now that I think about it, is a bit weird and kind of has an identity crisis. And this Snyder Cut in particular did not help that at all. Which is why I'm going to take this opportunity for a cheap plug, because the next video I have kind of talks about the DCEU as a whole and how they could kind of fix themselves from this weird, obscure nonsense that we've been kind of seeing for the past few years. But if you just want an actual rating for this movie, well then I guess I'd give it a 7 out of 10. But I'm an asshole and I want to say 6 out of 10. But if I wasn't an asshole, I'd say 7. So I'm gonna say 7. But, I don't know, maybe I want to be an asshole and say 6. Nah, it's a 7. It's a 7 out of 10. Basically, if you want to watch this movie and if you want to sit down for 4 hours, I think you're going to enjoy yourself. But if you don't want to, then by all means don't. It is not worth the 4 hours. There's a lot of cool stuff, okay? I'm a fan of Martian Manhunter, which I haven't really talked about in this video. I'm a fan of the whole Cyborg thing. I'm a fan of the Flash. Darkseid is a cool character, even though he looks a bit goofy in the movie. But there's just so much, and a lot of it is slow motion and really long, overdrawn fight scenes. But yeah, that's going to be the end of this video on Zack Snyder's Justice League. What do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments if you agree that I'm an asshole by saying it's a 7 out of 10, or if you actually agree with me and think that the entire movie is way too long. But yeah, leave a like on the video, comment, subscribe, all of that YouTuber stuff, and until next time, have a good day. Bye-bye.